Hey everyone, I'm Angela Lynn.
And I'm Jesse Lynn, and welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From? This week, we are revisiting how happy we are based on an article that I read in Psychology today. There's this idea that everyone experiences what's called the happiness curve, and that there's a general regression of happiness in your 20s and 30s, meaning like your happiness is going down or at the lowest point. And kind of as you come out of that into your 40s, 50s, 60s, your happiness curve kind of just goes upwards. And I feel like from what I've seen, it's like largely controlled, and they try to like manage out all of the other variables that can make a person that can affect a person's happiness. And the idea is just like your baseline level of happiness will increase over time as you age. And I found that to be really interesting because I think both of us are early to mid 30s. So we're kind of like coming out of the bottom of the curve. But I would say like it's really hard to see the top of the curve from where I am. It's kind of like, am I trending towards better baseline happiness? It doesn't always feel that way. So that's the topic of this week. Do you feel like you're generally getting happier as you age?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer since according to this curve, we're still in the dip, right? We're not, if it's supposed to be 40s and up, that where it's like you're in the ascending part of the curve, then we're not even we're not there yet.
The tailwinds, do you feel the tailwinds like pushing you?
I don't know. Not yet. I mean, and that's a depressing thing to say, but it depends on how you define happiness, which we did in a whole other episode, I think, right? Yeah, it depends on what you mean by like, are you happier? Because is it like a long-term state, or is it just like, do you find moments of joy every day more so than you did back then? Like, what does that really mean? But I do think from like a general statement standpoint, reacting to the idea of people being generally happier 40s and up, I can see why the results may be showing that. First of all, you're more stable then. Like 20s and 30s is a rough time. Let's discount childhood, right? You have like blissful ignorance time when you're not responsible for shit and your family pays for everything that you have. But then once you go into college and then like coming straight out of college, for a lot of people, the financial support ends and you're kind of discovering like paying for your life for the first time and what like real world takes to survive in society. And I think 20s is probably your like generally poorest time for most people because you're coming out of school. And if you went to school in the US, unfortunately, many people come out with debt and you're probably making not that much money. So it's hard to be so happy when you're just like struggling day to day. 30s, I can see it being like it's better than 20s because at least you're not making as little money as you were in your 20s, hopefully. But there's like other things coming towards that. Like some people have their quarter life crisis in like the 25 to 30 age, but like other people in their 30s. So you're kind of like questioning, am I on the right path? Like you're still young, but not that young. So you start having these identity crises around that stuff. Like I think all of 20s, we kept joking, like, oh, hashtag adulting, right? Because also millennials, that was like our word for so long. But the joke kind of being like we're pretending to be adults, like we're being forced into adult situations of like paying rent and like getting our shit together, but we all still felt like children in a lot of ways. Versus once you become 30, you're like, wait, I am actually supposed to be an adult now, but I still kind of feel like a child in a lot of ways and like I don't have my shit together. So I think the 30s can be a kind of confusing time for happiness as well because you start then feeling the pressures of a lot of like the adult things you are supposed to have done already or on your path towards doing because you see 40s as like that's like real fucking adult time, right? So before you hit that, you need to get your shit together. So 30s, I think, is more stable than 20s, but you're kind of going through like a whole separate adult transition, potential crises there internally. And then 40s and up, I can see it being generally happier because you are probably more sure of who you are by then in terms of like your career, your family, where you live, even like all those things are probably a bit more stable for the average person starting that time in your life. And then as you get like older and older, right? Because we were talking about, so this happiness curve is supposed to be like a U shape, which implies that the happiest point in your life is like the older you get, the happier you are. So I can certainly see the idea of like old people just like not giving a shit anymore. So there's an element of like the less you care about other shit, also like the happier you can be because less things bother you. But sorry, I'm going on a whole like monologue about this, but I do also think the old people being happy piece is probably dependent on where they live, because it's something that Ramona and I talk about a lot, is like whether there's community, because community has like a very strong influence on the mental and like emotional stability of individual people, whether or not they have community around them. And I think especially in places like the US, I would question that an average old person is like that happy, because a lot of them just get thrown into these like old people homes and are like never visited by their families, as opposed to like abroad in Europe and Asia, a lot of countries, like they're much more integrated into society and have like their own community that they hang out with like every single day, and they like are fueled by energetically. So I can see certainly in like Spain, I could see like an 80-year-old man being super happy in that time of his life, as opposed to like someone 80 in the US living in a old people home. Like it's just, yeah. Anyways, I can see the possibility, but it depends on where they live.
Yeah, in a way you were asking about before, where you're like, is this a global study? I'm like, I'm pretty sure this curve wouldn't exist if it was a US study. Everyone would be so sad. I think about the transitions of 20s into 30s, and there are a lot of moments where I view back at the 20s and I'm like, oh, I think I was like, general sense of well being was higher then. But as I try to like dissect why that is, I just kind of feel like it's because I'm not as stupid now. You know, my like I'm not as stupid and I'm not as naive about certain things. So you could say I'm jaded, but I just know more about how the world, if you will, work. Oh my god, it sounds like a million years old, but how the world works. I think when you're in your 20s, there's a sense of like unlimited potential, right? You're like, I put my nose to the grindstone, I can do whatever I want, like I'm in it to win it, and like I can get all the way there. And I think now that I'm in my 30s, I'm like, yeah, like part of that is true, but another real part is that, like, as I mentioned before, it's a lot of luck, a lot of nepotism, a lot of just you're at the right place at the right time. So in that sense, like, I guess for me, the baseline level of happiness hasn't really changed at all. It's just my perception of fairness and equality and like how I pictured the world to be has now more real parts of it, as opposed to like it's a rosy dream. And you know, the real parts of it are not always nice. So it feels and is perceived as something like more negative now that in my 30s, right? There's always like the idea of the dream is much sweeter than actually that path you have to walk to get there. And then like halfway through, you're like, actually, I don't want this anymore because it's not that like what I thought it was going to be. So that's kind of how I feel about the progression that you're saying. And I do wonder like how much of the happiness that folks enjoy later on in life is around just changing your perception of it and like what you can accept and what you choose to ignore versus like your baseline level of happiness actually being higher or stronger.
Yeah, I definitely agree that a lot of it is priorities and mental shift of what you think you want in your life and what you need and what is supposedly going to bring you happiness. We've talked a lot about like career advancement and all that stuff being so important to us when we're younger, and not that we don't care at all, but I think us and a lot of our friends, it's just like you kind of are like, okay, I want to do a good job, but I don't really care if I like get like promotion after promotion after promotion. Like in our 20s, you said like the potential is just like all there, right? Unlimited. And I do agree with that. There was this like invincibility kind of feeling, especially if you lived in like a big urban area like New York, because you just saw so much opportunity everywhere that you're like, why should I believe that there's a cap on anything? If I like try hard enough, I can do anything, right? And I also do think though that living somewhere like New York, LA, I assume too, and other big cities in your 20s can also make you believe that happiness is a lot of superficial things that are not necessarily that important. I had constant FOMO when I lived in New York. I don't think I even equated it to happiness, but I was just like, oh, I'm like not doing it right if I'm not out all the time with my friends and doing new things and like trying new things. I definitely was never happy just sitting at home by myself, right? And like being with myself. That was not something that I ever did because it was like, what are you, a loser? Like if you live in the city, you got to be out. Like that's just what like everyone said. I do think it takes time, and like Gen Z's like a whole different breed. I'm sure they are so like self-aware well before all the millennials became self-aware, but like a lot of us didn't start doing things like therapy or like self-awareness work, self-growth work until probably late 20s into early 30s. So I think a lot of us now appreciate like time with ourselves and like inner recharging and things like that, taking care of ourselves like inwardly. And so the shift of like what you're supposed to do and what is like supposed to make you happy for me definitely has shifted away from that stuff. Like I was just kind of reflecting on like my credit card statement recently, and I was like, I don't buy anything. Like I still like spend money, but all my money is spent on like groceries, going out for food or whatever, and like my dog. Like that's like all I spend on. I like very rarely buy new things for myself because material things don't really make me happy anymore, versus I do think when I was younger, I relied a lot on material things. Like I never was a big shopper or anything, but I think maybe because I also wanted recognition from other people about like my appearance and things like that. So I like bought more new stuff like clothing and like tried to like make myself up every day. Like I wouldn't leave the house unless I had makeup on at all. And like I'm not wearing makeup and we're recording a podcast right now that's going to go on the internet. You know, like there's just like a difference in kind of like what you care about when you're younger versus older. So yeah, I think the priorities and your like mental image of what you quote unquote have to do to be happy or to be accepted changes throughout your life as well. And that can recalibrate where you would judge yourself on like a happiness scale as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think like maybe one of the things about getting older, which you mentioned, that is good is like you start to do more things for yourself, even if it might be like grounded in something that was for someone else before. What you were saying about like your appearance, right? Like I feel like over the last couple of years, I spent a lot of time playing around with how I look, like my hair, jewelry, clothes, stuff like that. But I like doing it for myself. For me, it's like a fun way to slip into the experience of a person I'm not necessarily am, or like I perceive this is the thing that I am projecting. And I like to have a lot of fun with that. So I think there's definitely a lot of like reduction of extrinsic validation and like more intrinsically, internally driven things that you do. A lot of the exploration comes from when you're like, oh, this thing doesn't actually make me happy. Let's say like personal appearance, where you're like, oh, well, like I did this thing, but then like no one commented about it. And like now I'm sad about it. And in a way, you take that perception and that hope and you transform it into something for yourself as opposed to just letting it spiral into nothing. And I feel like a lot of that exploration has had to happen as those kind of big, if I think about like a word map of those, you know, those like giant words where it's like job, making money, stability, like as you kind of deepen your understanding of what that looks like day in and day out, you just find that there's like a certain threshold where you don't really want to go any deeper because the amount of investment you have to make isn't worth the kind of happiness that you might get back.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American-born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided I'm just going to do it myself. I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at WhereAreYouFromPod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyoufrom. Thanks y'all. I think related is also money. I think there's kind of like a twofold thing about money when you get older. One is like you're generally more well off than, at least again, once you're like straight out of college. Not everyone becomes some like tech billionaire or whatever later on in life, but you in your 40s and 50s versus you at age 19, 20, I would assume you make more money that time. So you're just like more stable from like a financial standpoint, unless you're living in poverty, which is like a whole different thing, because then money is always on top of your mind. You're just like unfortunately tied to that, because if you can't make ends meet, it's the only thing you can think about. But assuming you're at a place where you can fairly easily make ends meet, doesn't mean you're rich, but like you don't have to worry about if your paycheck is going to cover your rent and your food or whatever. I think money also starts becoming less important as part of like what you deem as happiness. Because I think when you're younger and struggling with money, a lot of times you do equate like the more money I make, the happier I'm going to get. That's like a lot of this lie that I think media a lot of times also sells us. And like there are some things that money can allow you to do, and like opportunities of like travel, for example, things you can do when you have money. But at the end of the day, once you've kind of like hit a certain point where your lifestyle doesn't change necessarily based on the level of money you have anymore, you realize like just having money in and of itself is not the happiness. And so then you start asking yourself like, so what does bring me happiness? And I think in 40s and up, a lot of that comes back to the people you have in your life and how much fulfillment you are getting from those people and the connections you have, and then the ability to feel some sort of fulfillment in your life from a job aspect, great. If not, like probably you found something that you do care about, whether that's like volunteering or a hobby or something, right? But I think you start realizing that like you need to start finding happiness outside of things that money can buy when you're 40s and up. At least that's my assumption, because I'm already veering that way, where it's like I don't really care about what I can buy. Like and even from like I love eating food, and it's really nice to like eat at, very high-end restaurants now and then, but I'm just as happy eating my like $7 plate of curry. That's my favorite spot in Kyoto, for example. Like I don't need super fancy shit to be happy. So yeah, I don't know. That's definitely something that I think plays into it. Is again, it's a rewiring in your mind. It's not like money has gone away as a thing that exists and is needed, but how much you emphasize like its role in your happiness.
I think money is correlated to happiness, but only to a certain degree, right? I think when you get to a place in your career you're earning where you don't feel like you have to worry about money, I think that's when there's diminishing returns, because that really is the drag, right? The drag is like the mental pressure of thinking about money all the time. Like, can I afford this? Can I afford that? And when you don't have to think about that, you don't have that anymore. So you're a little bit happier. I think just to like cap it off, I think the idea of this happiness curve is really interesting to me, because it is still a snapshot in time yet to be proven for folks like us who are aging upwards. I hate saying that, but like right now, that's what it looks like for people in 40s, 50s, and 60s. And we're like projecting in our way, like what we think would give us happiness in those in those age brackets, but are not necessarily the things that actually make those people happy currently. I don't really know necessarily if someone who's in their 60s is happy because they just don't have to work anymore. Because I think about like the whole boomer experience where people are like, put your nose to the grindstone and you do your job and then you can retire. And yeah, I would be really happy at 65 after doing like 30 years as an executive assistant working with somebody that I hated all the time. I would be so fucking happy when I retired. So I just think like these things change a lot and it's really contextual to that particular generation and like the cohort of people that you're around. So I'm just really curious to see, like, as we kind of get older and we're this like cohort of folks that is like more questioning what are the things in our life that make us happy, how that's going to look as we age. Does the constant questioning help us find things that make us happy, or just is a constant questioning that makes us less happy because we're always like, what makes you happy? So yeah, that's just my brain teaser to end on.
That's such a good point because, yeah, when I think about like my parents, their idea around career versus retirement is so rigid. It definitely is like you put in your time, like you're in prison, right? Like you put in your time, and when you're out, that's when you deserve retirement and to be happy and have like no responsibilities. And I'm like, okay. I do wonder when they redo this study for the next generation and onwards if it'll still be the you. Let's see.
Yeah, like we're not waiting to live our lives like our parents were, right? Like my parents did the same thing. They're like, you work really hard now, and then when you're old, you can relax. And I'm like, why would I do that? I can work and I can also live my life now. So it's like when you can do that now, what's left for you when you get older?
Okay, listeners, we'll re-record this in about 40 years and let you know if we're happier or not.
Well, listeners, thank you for joining us again for another episode. We know we talk a lot about happiness, and obviously it's because we want to find our own happiness, and we hope that you can find happiness as well. Let us know about your thoughts on this topic. Do you feel like you've gotten happier as you've gotten older? Do you think that's like a baseline level of happiness? It's a change in your perception? Hit us up in the socials. Let us know how you're feeling about this particular topic.
Yes, and as we wrap up, it is going into holiday season. So we do want to remind folks that you don't need to be happy go lucky going into holiday season. We've talked about before the kind of the blue Christmas vibes of like everyone tells you you're supposed to be happy during holiday season, but it's okay to be a normal human and have your ups and downs even now going into these next few weeks. Just remember what is good in your life and what you're grateful for, and hopefully you have an amazing new year to come. We don't have any more episodes left of this season, so this is the last time you'll be hearing from us in 2024, but we wish you all the best and that you can find all the happiness for yourself.
That makes me happy already.
Well, listeners, until next time, 再见, bitches.